Today we will be exploring the campaign in Gallipoli at the dawn of the First World War. World War I saw two sides duking it out. The French, British, and Russian Allied force fought against the Central Powers, featuring Germany and Turkey, where their campaign in Gallipoli took place. Gallipoli was important because it was the entrance point to the Dardanelles, the only way to get from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, which is one of three ways to get large amounts of supplies to Russia from Western Europe. This would enable the French and British to give weapons and other necessities to Russia. Beginning on March 18, 1915, on the orders of Vice Admiral Sackville-Carden, the combined fleet of French and British battleships began the dangerous journey up the Dardanelles, encountering stiff resistance from the forts Sed El Bahr and Compiègne, and losing ships due to the mines, which had supposedly been taken care of before the assault by smaller ships. Three waves of ships went into the strait, shelling the Turkish defenders and driving them from their positions on the coastal batteries. They focused heavy fire on the secondary and tertiary batteries, as they were much smaller and more exposed. The main Turkish guns were either in blast-resistant forts or too far from the coast to be fired on by the battleships. After turning back from the assault, the Allied force lost the irresistible Ocean and Bouvet to mines, and the Canopus to coastal batteries. Overall, the attack was neither a success nor a defeat. The Allies had succeeded in softening up coastal defenses, and had succeeded in shelling artillery and defenders in preparation for the amphibious assault. However, the Ottomans had sunk 4 ships, and although sustaining some losses, they were not nearly as weak as the Allies had fought before. The next phase of the battle is the amphibious assault. Multiple units from across the Allied forces were present, including French, Anzac, and British divisions. This is quite possibly the greatest blunder of the campaign. Lacking a supreme commander, the military and naval forces were under independent leadership. Military intelligence was low, as nobody had consulted the careful pre-war files on defenses at Gallipoli, and there was an utter lack of infrastructure on the Greek islands that hosted Allied forces. Therefore, the advantage of surprise was lost, and all the while, Lehman von Sanders had been preparing a proper defense of the peninsula. He had been made commander of the Dardanelles shortly after war had broken out, and was an experienced German leader. He split his forces into 6 divisions. 2 defended the Asiatic side at the fort of Compiègne. On the European side of the strait, he placed 1 division in charge of Cape Helles, 1 division in charge of the Sari-Brunei beaches, and the remaining 2 were held in reserve position, centrally located. Previous to him assuming command, the Turkish defenders were all located on the coast, allowing Allied forces to encircle them all and roll them up. General Sir Ian Hamilton assumed command of all Allied forces, reorganizing them into 3 groups. The British would attack Cape Helles, Anzac Sari-Brunei, and the French would launch a diversionary attack at Compiègne. It would be the largest and most complex amphibious assault in history. The attack began on the 25th of April, when the first wave of Anzac forces hit the beach of Sari-Brunei, now renamed Anzac Cove. The Australian brigades were opposed by the 2nd Battalion of the Turkish 27th Regiment, who had a mountain battery to the north, and 4 15-centimeter guns to the south. They encountered only minimal resistance. However, upon sunrise, they realized that they had landed a mile north of their intended landing point, meaning that they were encircled in thick brush and rough terrain. As the day continued, more forces poured into this area, and the Turkish defenders realized the tactical significance of the high ground overlooking Anzac Cove. So Mustafa Kemal, a commander of the 19th Turkish Division, ordered his men to take up positions and ensure the possession of this high ground. British forces landed at the tip of the Cape Helles, encountering a large Turkish force and positions fortified by machine guns and barbed wire. They were mowed down and faced severe casualties, but British forces on the less defended beaches were able to take out the fortifications and artillery posts out from behind, flanking and encircling these positions. A British steamer called the River Clyde is one of the most endearing images of the whole campaign. With holes cut into its lower decks, it steamed ahead until running aground, then troops streamed out of it, using smaller boats as makeshift bridges to shore. Across the Cape, Turkish counterattacks and resistance surprised the British, who had anticipated a weak and lazy Turkish military. French forces experienced a good deal of success on their attack at Konkan, taking it after only a couple waves of troops. Their attack served as a diversion for Turkish forces, as well as preventing the Turkish artillery batteries at the fort from firing on landing craft and soldiers. After holding this position for 2 days, French troops pulled out of the fort, joining their British allies at Hell's Point. After the exciting beginning to that campaign, Hamilton ordered his men to dig in. They pushed the Turks back slowly, building a network of trenches to ensure their safety as they advanced. Warfare in this new Eastern Front was quickly bogging down, becoming more similar to the Western Front's stalemate, albeit at a much smaller scale. The battles of Krithia were typical of trench warfare. Artillery would barrage the enemy lines, and then soldiers would rise up out of the trenches and march towards the enemy, amidst a hail of bullets and mortar shells. Hamilton scheduled these attacks to start at noon, when the sun was highest, leading to massive amounts of Allied casualties compared to the relatively low numbers of Turkish forces killed. Lehman von Sanders knew that this was a campaign of attrition. All that he needed to do was grind down Allied forces enough to halt their invasion. Then the Allies would evacuate, realizing the futility of taking Dardanelles. These unimaginative attacks, along with the worsening health of Allied forces, led to a loss of morale by Allied troops. On the other hand, even though the Turks were undergoing the same conditions, their morale stayed high, possibly because they were defending their homeland from outside invaders. The frequent daytime attacks by Allied forces were repulsed vigorously by the Turkish, who gained a small amount of ground every attack that the Allies had. This led to a state of stalemate. Both sides settled into their respective trenches, making occasional pushes into each other's territory, only to be repulsed back. German U-boats infested the waters, preventing British battleships from providing fire support, while the British submarines kept the Germans from sending supplies to Lehman von Sanders, halting the battle from being shifted too far in either side's way. Hamilton needed a large offensive to turn the battle in his favor, so he looked to the relatively inactive Anzac force located at Anzac Cove. The Battle of Sulva, or Sari-Bar Offensive, began on the 6th of August with diversionary attacks at Lone Pine, at the southern end of the Anzac perimeter. That evening, two forces moved out from the Anzac perimeter to capture the foothills, up which two assault columns would move on their way to seize Chinook Bar, Hill Q, and Hill 972. On the right, New Zealand Mounted Rifles units and native contingents seized Old Number 3 Post, Tabletop, Destroyer Hill, Bow Chops Hill, and Little Tabletop, indicated by the orange arrows from Number 1. On the left, a combined Australian, British, and Indian force headed northwards to secure Hill 972 and Hill Q, indicated by the purple arrows from Number 3. The plan came unstuck. The left assaulting column got lost moving up a rugged valley and failed to rendezvous with the column on the right, indicated by the red arrow from Number 2. It was daylight on the 7th of August before the troops were ready to move. By then, the Ottomans had reinforced their defenses at Chinook Bar, indicated by the green blocks and arrows. Across the valley, the 3rd Austrian Light Horse Brigade launched an attack at Neck, indicated by the red arrow from Number 4, losing more than 200 men killed in a forlorn attempt to divert Ottoman attention away from Chinook Bar. The Wellington Battalion finally reached the summit of Chinook Bar in the early hours of the 8th of August. They found it unoccupied. The defenders had withdrawn during the night. It was not long before the Ottomans sent troops to retake the position. New Zealand and British units managed to hold the summit until the 10th of August, when a massive Ottoman attack swept them off Chinook Bar. British forces on the approaches to Hill Q were also driven back. A lone Gurkha battalion reached the top of Hill Q, indicated by Number 5, on the 9th of August, but was unable to consolidate its position. By mid-August, the British and Anzac forces had abandoned the exposed forward positions they had won at great cost in order to establish a defensible new perimeter. The Sari Bear offensive had failed. The final positions of the Anzac and newly arrived British forces were determined after the Sari Bar offensive. Although taking considerable possession of land, the offensive was unable to break through the Turkish line, only marginally increasing the Allied possessions. After the failure of the Sari Bar offensive, the British Admiralty had to assess the value of Gallipoli and the amount of manpower and supply they would have to pour into to take control of the strait. As the Germans and Turks continued to pour troops and build forts along the shore, it became obvious that the fight would continue no longer. The final nail in the coffin was when, on the first day of winter, more than 60% of Allied troops in the trenches had frostbite, and a blizzard swept through the poor Turkish and Allied troops, killing many who had cut their pants into shorts and used their jackets as sandbags during the warm summer months. They were unprepared for a harsh winter that Gallipoli could produce, and the Admiralty was unlikely to support a complete resupply. With a clear stalemate developed, the only logical conclusion was evacuation. Evacuation was ironically the best executed portion of the whole campaign, and it went off without any major issues. Beginning on the 12th of December, Anzac forces slowly poured out of Anzac Cove. All the cooking fires were lit nightly, so not to tip off the Turkish that there was a retreat taking place. By the 18th of December, 3/4 of the men had withdrawn. All that remained were a precarious 20,000 men. This was a very low number, and it was by far the most dangerous part of the retreat. However, they kept on firing the same amount of ammunition, setting up the same amounts of tents, and lighting the campfires nightly. They were evacuated finally on the 19th of December by boat. Automatically fired rifles were set up, using a candle to burn through a string that, when broken, would fire a machine gun towards the Turkish. Mines were placed in the bay and detonated when the last men escaped, destroying the remnants of Anzac Cove. Only 2 men were wounded in the whole extraction from Anzac. In Cape Helles, the British and French experienced a great deal of success as well. Troops pulled back slowly from their trenches, heavily mining them as they left to stall the Turkish offense. Employing similar tactics as the Anzacs had for their final waves of troops, the British had no casualties. By the 9th of January, all troops had abandoned Gallipoli, and the remaining ammo dumps were blown up on the mainland. Overall, the Battle of Gallipoli was undoubtedly a disaster for the Allies, who had sent 500,000 men to the Dardanelles, half of whom became casualties. The Turkish losses were slightly more, just over 250,000 men. Gallipoli ruined the reputations of Hamilton and young Winston Churchill, who was one of the main proponents of the attack. It would take many years for Churchill to regain his prominence after this blunder. It did, however, give the Australians and New Zealanders a new national identity. The proudest anniversary of both countries is Anzac Day, coinciding with the day of the Gallipoli landings. The invasion of Gallipoli and its resulting campaign saw the most heroic actions. However, the sheer incompetency of the leadership led a valid strategic option to becoming a helpful. Gallipoli is glorified today, featured in video games such as Battlefield 1, with scores of songs and poetry written about it. Thousands flocked to the peninsula's 22 military burial sites and various monuments. However, the atrocities and dangers seen at Gallipoli will never be forgotten by those who participated in its battle.